Hey everyone, welcome back to LT Gaming. My name is Tom and today I'm delving into KeeperRL, a game that's all about embracing your inner evil mastermind. If you're into dungeon management, roguelike thrills and RPG action, you're definitely going to want to stick around for this one. So what is KeeperRL? It's a retro style dungeon simulator where you play the role as a keeper, building up your own dark lair, recruiting minions and sending them out to explore and wage war against other factions. The game blends roguelike mechanics, classic RPG elements, along with strategic base building, giving a mix that feels nostalgic yet still fresh. Now KeeperRL officially came out of early access back in February and it's looking good since then. As someone who's grown up loving dungeon sims like Dungeon Keeper and management heavy games such as Dwarf Fortress, this one's definitely hitting a sweet spot for me. Plus there's a new update dropping today that's going to add a ton of new content, so I figure it's the perfect time to bring this indie gem to the channel and dive in and see what makes KeeperRL stand out in 2024. But let's break down what you'll actually be doing in KeeperRL. You start off in a randomly generated world with nothing but a few minions and a whole lot of ambition. From there you're digging into the mountainside, carving out your dungeon bit by bit. You set up essentials of course, like beds for your minions to rest, crafting tables for gear, and training rooms to get your troops in fighting shape. You can even sprinkle a few sinister decorations to get that true evil lair vibe. But it's not just about the aesthetic side, you have to make it defensible, because sooner or later some faction is going to show up and try to ruin your day. This is where traps, guard stations and choke points come in. You need to think strategically about your layout to keep these invaders at bay, because if they break through, things can go south really fast. And of course you want to be going on the offensive as well. And the world map is packed with dangerous locations to explore, raid and pillage for loot and infamy. But if you fail to crush a faction, they might come looking for payback, so you gotta have your dungeon tip top. While you're busy fortifying your base, don't forget to dig deeper. There is the Z plane as well. There are treasures and valuable resources hidden within the mountain, along with some not so friendly creatures lurking below as well. So you need to balance the time between expanding your dungeon, gathering resources, and venturing out to keep your minions happy and well equipped. Now speaking of minions, the type of keeper you choose changes up gameplay in some pretty big ways. You've got a lot of different factions to master, each with their own style and strengths. You want to play as a dark wizard wielding black magic? You can. You prefer to raise an army of the undead as a necromancer? That's on the table too. Your choice of faction will really affect everything from the layout of your dungeon to the way you approach combat. Resource management is a big part of the game as well. You're going to be mining for precious resources, crafting items for your minions, and making sure everyone's happy and well fed. If morale dips too low, you could be dealing with a rebellion instead of these other factions. And the world itself is very detailed. Creatures use equipment and consumables, a whole range of different items, spells and special attacks to master. Combat is a really unique part of this game. It's tactical and turn-based, so every move's going to count. You command your troops from above or possess a minion directly to have control there, which adds a real veneer of strategy for me. The stakes are really high too, enemies are pretty brutal, they blind, poison, chop off limbs, and if your keeper dies, that's it, it's game over. So you've got to weigh every decision because a small mistake can lead to disaster or the end of your game. To give you a bit of a taste of the chaos, a quick story from one of my recent playthroughs for this video. I was pretty confident after steamrolling some bandits with my new bishop character, thinking I had things under control. But I ran into a group of dark elves and they just completely wiped out my squad in no time. I had to retreat to my dungeon to regroup, and it was just a reminder of how brutal KeeperRL can be. The deeper you go, the more layers of strategy you uncover and the more intense it gets. Alright, let's get into the roguelike elements in KeeperRL because they really define the experience here. First off, every game you start takes place in a procedurally generated world, which means no two runs are ever the same. One playthrough you might be facing off against goblins in the beginning, while another will have you squaring up against dragons and dark elves right off the bat. It keeps things fresh, but you never know what's lurking just beyond your dungeon walls. With that randomness though comes some serious difficulty. The game does not hold your hand, and if you're not careful, you find yourself quickly in over your head. I've had strong adventures completely derail in the mid-game because of the sudden difficulty spikes between enemy camps, and this is a criticism I have here. You can go from absolutely crushing and steamrolling bandits to then getting steamrolled in turn by another powerful faction, and it happens in a blink of an eye. I'd honestly like to see some updates in the future that balance this out a bit. Maybe some way to easily scale your forces when you hit the mid-game, because sometimes it hits like a brick wall. Then of course with that there's the permadeath. And it really rounds up the tension, because once your keeper dies, that's it, game over. There's no load up your last save and go from there. Every decision does count here. Every battle has the potential to be your last, so it's a double-edged sword. The thrill of knowing your adventure could end at any moment is exciting of course, but it can be a little deflating when you're having a great run and suddenly a Cyclops blunders in and it's over, your keeper is dead. That said, when you do manage to survive and make it further than before, the victory does feel a lot sweeter. When it comes to inspiration, KeeperRL clearly takes some cues from classics like Dungeon Keeper in the terms of premise. You're an evil overlord managing a dungeon, but for me it's more reminiscent of Dwarf Fortress in how detailed and unforgiving it can be. It has strategic depth and simulation aspects that make it feel much closer to that game. Every decision can ripple out in unexpected ways, but KeeperRL does some things differently that make it stand out. For starters, you have the ability to possess your minions and take direct control, and it gives it a personal touch, which you don't see in most games like this. It adds a layer of freedom where you can switch between the big picture down to the micro level action when you want. And on the topic of what's making it unique, the pixel art. It's simple but fits the game's vibe perfectly. Gives it a classic roguelike feel without feeling too flashy along with it. Plus with the new update there's a ton of new content to sink your teeth into. We're talking about the Bishop Keeper here especially. I've enjoyed playing him a lot. A new roster of minions, priests, acolytes, even courtesans as well, and a whole new church building system for performing mass with different bonuses, prayer books, and you can even conduct confessions to give minions experience. And on the other side of this, you can summon demons by performing a black mass. Each one has unique abilities based upon various mythologies, and I have found it really intriguing so far. It's pretty wild and I love it. Let's wrap this up with some pros and cons for you guys. KeeperRL is a dark fantasy gem from a solo developer, and if you're into dungeon management games, it is a ton of fun. It's got that classic Dungeon Keeper vibe, but definitely leans more into the colony sim and management side of things. It makes it easy to jump into, but it is challenging to truly master. There's a lot of depth here, and the game really rewards players who take their time to dig into its systems. On the flip side, it does have some rough edges. The difficulty can be really punishing, particularly in the mid-game, when you're trying to figure out how to make that big leap in power. With permadeath on the line, one wrong move can send you back to square one, and that's really frustrating sometimes. The high stakes of course add to the tension, but at times the curve feels too steep on the difficulty. Overall, the cons do not overshadow what the game does well. There's a ton of content already, and there's a lot more planned for the future, so if you're up for a challenge and you love the genre, KeeperRL is definitely worth checking out. Give it a shot, LT gamers, if this sort of thing tickles your fancy.